Good evening, folks, and welcome to episode 3 of my Halloween countdown for 2016, where I am talking about the Edgar Allan Poe films directed by Roger Corman in the 1960s at American International Pictures. And I made a mistake in my first video. I said that there were 7 of these films directed by Roger Corman, when in actual fact there were 8. So I apologize for that mistake. I'm screwing up already. I'm also getting way behind here, and let's see if I can actually finish all this by Halloween. I'm not counting on it. I'm going to try. Okay, so now we're up to the third film in the series in 1962, which is The Premature Burial, which is on this Midnight Movies double bill along with The Mask of the Red Death, which I will get to later. Okay, so The Premature Burial. Let's see. What can we say about this film? Well, quite a bit. Now, Roger Corman wanted to make this film with Vincent Price, but he couldn't, and there's a very special reason for that. Um, Although Roger Corman had done a lot of films for American International Pictures, and they had a pretty good working relationship, at this point there was a disagreement between Corman and the owners or the managers of the studio, James Nicholson and Samuel Z. Arkoff, about money, something to do with the profits for the last couple of films. They were disagreeing about amounts. So Corman decided that he wanted to make this film independently and find another distributor or distribute it himself. Well, the company that did the laboratory work and the color for American International Films, the name of which was Pathé, they were interested in becoming distributors themselves. So they worked out a deal with Roger Corman to get this film made. And they signed up together. And unfortunately, Vincent Price, being under exclusive contract to American International Pictures, could not work for Corman outside of AIP. So Corman hired veteran actor Ray Milland, a very good actor from the old golden age of Hollywood, an Oscar winner for The Lost Weekend in 1945. And so they started production. And on the first day of production, Samuel Z. Arkoff and James Nicholson came onto the set and shook hands with Roger Corman and wished him well. And Roger Corman thought that was really nice since I'm not working for them. And then they said, oh, by the way, we bought the rights of the film from Pathé. I guess they had told Pathé that if they went through with this plan, then Pathé might lose the business from AIP, which would not be good for them. So they agreed to sell the rights back to AIP. So once again, the old team was back together. And speaking of the old team, Roger Corman brought back his cinematographer, Floyd Crosby, from the first 2 Poe films, and art director, Daniel Haller. So once again, you have that beautiful, brightly colored sort of gothic decay look of the mansion and the grounds. It was absolutely beautiful. Pathé color. This one was not written by Richard Matheson, who had done the first 2 films. For some reason, the screenplay this time was done by Charles Beaumont and Ray Russell. Now, the film had to do with, well, the fear of being buried alive. Ray Milland plays a medical student. He's a little too old to be a medical student, but that's how they describe him in the movie, named Guy Carrell, who lives in this gorgeous mansion, which is not unlike the House of Usher, except that they've taken better care of it, right? So he lives in the family mansion. And of course, most of his relatives are interred below, as is usual custom in these movies. And he has this inordinate fear of being buried alive. And he believes that a lot of people in his family, including his father, were buried in a cataleptic state. He swears that when he was a young boy and his father was buried, he could hear his father calling for help from the tomb, from the crypt. And of course, nobody believed him and nobody else heard it. So all of his life, he's had this morbid fear. And now that he's working as a medical student, along with a doctor named Gideon Galt, who is played by Alan Napier, they're involved in, at the beginning of the film, they're shown robbing a grave, okay, in the local graveyard. And when the grave is opened, when the coffin is opened, it's obvious that the gentleman who was buried, whoever it was, had been buried alive. You can see that he was trying to get loose and clawing at the lid and all that. So this puts Guy Carrell even deeper into his depression about being buried alive. So depressed that he breaks his engagement to his beautiful fiancee, Emily Galt, who happens to be Dr. Galt's daughter. Emily is played by beautiful English actress Hazel Court. Well, Hazel Court tries to convince Guy to, stop this fear and give their marriage, give their life together a chance. And she finally does convince him over the objections of Guy's sister, Kate, played by veteran actress Heather Angel. Well, as the story goes on, although Guy does marry Emily and he does seem to make some kind of an attempt to have a real life and get over these fears, a lot of things keep happening that continue to convince him of the possibility that he might someday die in a cataleptic state and be buried alive. So something he does, he sort of goes overboard in trying to prevent this from happening. He builds this mausoleum, this crypt for himself on the estate that looks like a chapel, actually. It even has a bell tower at the top of it. And inside he has all these different ways for someone who is buried alive to get out of the crypt. It has a platform for the coffin in the center of the room. And he shows Emily and their best family friend, Miles Archer, who was played by Richard Ney, who was also a medical student. He shows them what he's done with the coffin. For example, inside the coffin, there's a rope or something that you can pull to make the coffin lid come open. If that doesn't work, there are tools embedded into the lid or chained to the lid that they can use to dig his way out. There are different things he can do to open up a passageway in the wall or in the ceiling. There's a rope to pull the bell in case nothing else works, so we can alert people from the outside that, hey, I'm alive, I'm not dead. And if all that fails, he has a goblet filled with poison so that he can just end it all. Well, you would think that this would make him feel a little more secure, but it really doesn't. One evening he has a shock which actually makes him pass out. While he is unconscious, he has this incredible dream sequence, which is beautifully shot, where he believes he sees himself in that coffin inside the crypt, and everything goes wrong. He finally manages to get the coffin just to vibrate its way off of the platform, fall onto the floor, and break open. And when he gets out of the coffin, he sees that everything is covered in cobwebs and dust. Everything is withered away. All the ropes and everything that might pull the bell or open up this or that, they all just they're decayed and they break off. There's a giant tarantula walking around. I'm not sure where that came from, but there's a tarantula, there are rats, and then he decides to poison himself in the dream. And when he opens up the goblet, he sees that it's filled with worms. So it's just an absolute, his worst nightmare come to life. And that's kind of how the film goes until the whole thing is revealed. I'm going to give you a spoiler here. Maybe a lot of you have already seen this, but there's a spoiler. It turns out that his wife Emily was behind a lot of these things. For example, they finally decide to help alleviate Guy's fears by opening up his father's tomb to show him that he was not buried alive. But when they do open the tomb, by the looks of the coffin and the corpse, it's obvious that the man had been trying to get out. So this actually gives Guy what seems to be a heart attack, and they pronounce him dead, when in reality he is in a cataleptic state. And as the funeral is going on, and as he's being carried away, he's unable to move, he's unable to speak, but you can hear his thoughts. He's like, please, I'm alive, don't do this. So they actually bury him. And fortunately for him, he comes back to life in time when the grave diggers are removing his body. They're going to take it to Dr. Galt to use for medical practice. And he realizes from what he's hearing that Dr. Galt, the grave diggers, and his wife Emily were all in this to make him pass away so that she could get all the money from the estate. So once again, it's kind of like The Pit and the Pendulum. It's love, betrayal, lust, all this sort of thing. So in a way, the story is kind of repetitive from the other two films, and that's one objection that a lot of people have to the Premature Burial is that it really wasn't anything new. It wasn't taking it in a new direction. And I sort of agree, but not really, and that sounds very wimpy, I know. But I think the fact that they had a different leading man brings a whole different kind of sensibility and a different kind of conflict and tension to the movie and to the story. Now, I love Vincent Price, and I know that he could have done a terrific job in this role, but I think Ray Milland has a whole different approach to acting and to just this kind of conflict than Vincent Price would have had. So I think it brought something new to it. Also, there's something about the way Roger Corman opens up this film by showing a lot of things outside along the grounds and in the graveyard. It's not so much in the other films. Almost everything takes place inside the haunted castle or the decaying household. And in this one, they actually went outside and they just kind of gave it a different dimension. There was a little more movement in the Premature Burial. And it's said that they created this incredibly misty, strange, gothic, dark graveyard atmosphere. They used something like 2,000 pounds of dry ice and fog juice and all this, and they had swirling mist just constantly. I mean, even if you were just looking out the window in the middle of the day, you could see the swirling mist. It just never went away. But I thought it was kind of cool. And I don't know. I just think that there's a lot to recommend this movie. It may not be the best of the series. I don't think there's a worst. I'm not going to rate them as being worst or best. I like it. I think it's very well done. It's beautiful to look at. It has the usual Roger Corman efficiency where a lot of things are used again that you could recognize from the other films. And of course, I know the ideas are being recycled, but that doesn't bother me so much because as a fan of the gothic horror genre, I find these fears of premature burial and all this sort of thing just infinitely fascinating, and I think that they can be explored many ways and in many different ways. Different times and many different ways. And there's always just layer upon layer about what you can say about this particular human fear, and I don't know. I just find it interesting, and so for me there is no repetition about this movie that makes it unwatchable or less interesting. So I don't know. That's just my feeling, and I'm probably babbling here. So Hazel Court makes her first appearance in a Roger Corman uh, Edgar Allan Poe film. She would make two more, and she was already sort of known to horror fans for being in films like The Curse of Frankenstein for Hammer Films, The Man Who Could Cheat Death, Dr. Blood's Coffin. Let's see. Later on, the other film she would make for Corman would be The Raven and The Mask of the Red Death. Heather Angel, as I said, was a veteran actress. She had actually worked with Ray Milland in his very first film back in 1929. It was called Bulldog Drummond. Okay? Now, Alan Napier is another character actor very well known to a lot of people, especially as he played a character in the Batman TV series. I can't remember now the name of the character, but a lot of people remember him for that. But he also worked with Ray Milland in the classic ghost story, The Uninvited, back in 1944. So it was fun to see them interacting again. And the two gravediggers were played by John Dierkes and Dick Miller. Now, Dick Miller was pretty well known in Corman films, American International films. He'd been around for a long time. He was the star of A Bucket of Blood and did a lot of supporting roles over the years. Always a quirky, interesting character to see pop up in any film or TV show. So I'm not sure what else I want to say about this. The film did make money, although it didn't make as much as the first two, but it certainly inspired Roger Corman and AIP to keep going. So I would recommend absolutely that you check out Premature Burial. And I hope that I didn't spoil it by giving you that little bit of a plot line. Oh, one more thing I want to say. There's what I consider to be kind of a shocking ending, maybe just for the time that it was made. At the end, since Hazel Court, the character she's playing, Emily, is found out to be an unfaithful wife. Uh, after Guy Carell, played by Ray Milland, has been risen from the dead or supposedly dead, he really loses it and he seeks revenge on everybody who is. He kills the gravediggers, he kills Dr. Galt, and then he goes after his wife. And of course, when she sees him alive instead of dead, she passes out cold. He carries her to the grave that he has just been risen from. He ties up her hands, and then after she wakes up and starts screaming for help, he rolls her over into the grave and starts throwing dirt on her. And he actually buries her alive. And it's really a shocking scene. I mean, and Hazel Court was actually down there in that grave, and she was getting buried by dirt, and had some kind of a tiny little straw just to help her breathe during the time that she was down there. But it's a very shocking scene as an ending for a horror film. Very, very well done. So, okay, another spoiler. Sorry. Okay, I will be back next. Who knows when, but I'll try to get this all done before Halloween. But I will be back next for the other film of 1962, The Tales of Terror. So, thank you for watching.